Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation. Spencer Ackerman was a guest on my show discussing his book, Reign of Terror, How the 9/11 Era Destabilized America and Produced Trump. During our conversation, he mentioned he was reading a book called My Name is Red and was so enthusiastic about it, I decided to give it a read. A couple of months later, I find myself in a book club with the award-winning journalist. Not intimidating at all, right? My husband Oscar joins in on the conversation too, and we had a great time. My Name is Red is a Turkish novel by Nobel Prize recipient Orhan Pamuk. The book features miniaturists or artists during the Ottoman Empire and is a murder mystery. Spencer beautifully sets up the book for the first 20 minutes of this episode, after which we dive in and talk about the themes of the book and some of our favorite characters. I love book club discussions because they allow you to truly appreciate the book on various levels with others. For a book like My Name is Red, it also helps to have someone way smarter than you share their perspective. Insert Spencer Ackerman. Even if you haven't read the book yet or don't plan to, you can still appreciate the conversation. While Spencer will modestly express his lack of expertise on the book, he ties in several historical references that bring a depth to the book that I would not have otherwise noted. What does hip-hop artist NAS have to do with master miniaturists in the Ottoman Empire? Find out in our discussion. In case you don't already know, Spencer Ackerman has been a national security correspondent for outlets like The New Republic, Wired, The Guardian, and currently The Daily Beast for nearly the entire war on terror. He is the publisher of the Forever Wars newsletter on Substack, where he tracks the ongoing course of the war on terror. I highly suggest you check it out. I'm loving these conversations and hope you are too. If you are, please rate my podcast on your platform of choice and share it with others. If you would like to support with a donation to help keep this podcast going, you can become a patron of the show by visiting my website or patreon.com/SifuMimiChan. For comments or suggestions, reach out on social media at SifuMimiChan. Now, on with the show. Hello, Spencer. Nice to see you again.
It's so great to be back, Mimi. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh my gosh. Well, you're stuck now. Unfortunately, you're going to have to talk to me all the time. But we also have with us Oscar today.
Yes.
I am actually honored to be here. I'll be in the background, and then when you need me, I'll jump in.
So this is awesome because this was just prompted by our first conversation. You recommended a book, My Name is Red. And I was like, oh, let me start reading this. It sounds so, interesting, this crime, murder mystery. And wow, I got myself into quite a lot and I roped Oscar in. And here we are in like podcast book club world.
I know I've never done this before. So let me just be upfront in saying, like, one of the things about being in the presence of a major work of literature is like recognizing that you're like quite possibly like not up to the task of understanding it, that like you're going to have to wrestle with a text like this. And on your first reading, you may not get it. So somehow it came to be that despite that anxiety, we were just sort of like talking back and forth and convinced one another that it would be a good idea to extemporize about Orhan Pamuk's My Name is Red, an absolute masterpiece of a novel about an overlooked, from a Western perspective, period in history and the splendor of the civilization it produced.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, wow, this is beautifully written. And there were like moments during this book. It was very up and down for me because one moment I'm like, yes, I'm feeling this. And then another, I'm like, really, we're going to just read about like horses for what felt like 3 hours.
I love it.
There was a lot of different feelings during it. But Oscar and I were talking, and then when I was texting with you, you're like, well, I think it's like, Russian literature. After you kind of get past the whole like feeling of translation and get used to it, I was like, oh my gosh, I have some Russian literature stories for you. I do not do well with Russian literature. So I was like, oh, that's not such a great analogy.
I think on my side, I am not smart enough to get Russian literature. So Mimi and I have attempted to read a few, and I've never gotten into it. This, however, I think was just beautifully written, almost like calligraphy. So you can't help but but appreciate and love the way it was written, even if you don't understand all the subtext, which I fall on that category of not understanding it all, but being able to appreciate it.
Yeah, I feel that.
I mean, definitely. But I just like, in the same way that a major theme of the book is the religious awe that art can inspire and invoke. I feel that way reading My Name is Red in English and like thinking to myself, like, what it like, oh, I like, should I want to like learn Turkish to read Orhan Pamuk, and I'm sure a ton of incredible novelists. One of the things that also like spurred my interest is like 9 times out of 10, if I need to go to sleep, I'm going to watch a Great Courses lecture series on the Ottoman Empire.
Oh, okay.
And one of the things that I took away from this lecture course, I need to start like really reading about the Ottoman Empire in earnest. It ends terribly. So I just want to make it clear. I am not here on this podcast to like, in any sense, explain away the great crimes of the end of the Ottoman Empire, let alone the Armenian genocide. What I do mean to say is just that, like, among the things that this course goes into is the great disjuncture that happens with the creation of the post-Ottoman Republic of Turkey, which introduces not only political and cultural, but linguistic changes to the Turkish language and creates modern Turkish. The Great Courses lecture series instructed that one of the consequences of the creation of modern Turkish has been to sever the connection to the literature of the Ottoman period and earlier. And I understand that that is something that Pamuk is trying to address in this book, which I imagine, like, were we to read it in the language Pamuk wrote it in, it would be drawing subtle but unmissable to the native speaker attention to like how the language was deployed in the 16th century versus how a 21st century writer is writing it.
Yeah, it's always difficult, I think, for anything to be translated to actually fully capture the meaning. And I feel like that's a huge part of, I would say, the lack of appreciation of the general public. And I mean, and also it's not like a small book. So it's such a heavy tackle and a commitment, right? But it was just interesting. Like, there were different themes in it that I definitely picked up on, and kind of we kind of would laugh about, or kind of actually converse about, right? So we were actually in New York when we were listening to this, and we were driving to the Catskills after we saw you, as a matter of fact, and we're listening to the audio, and there was some really fun chapters. But it's just so interesting because it starts off with a murder, and it's literally like a guy's murdering a guy basically out of religious beliefs. And I'm like, religious war. And like, it's just like the irony and like how that always happens, right? Where like people kill in the name of religion, and it's like he's literally getting murdered for something that they felt was like sacrilege. I just find that all sorts of irony, and how like that's constantly a thing when it comes to religion and stuff. So I don't know.
What do you think we should do? Should we attempt summarizing the book before discussing it, or should we kind of wave that away and say, we're going to assume, if you're going to go down this road with us, that you've read My Name is Red, or you're fine with us riffing on it?
No,
this is your house.
I think let's do a short summary. You're right. Let's do a short summary. Why don't you do the honors of that short summary?
Right. Mimi started the
summary with
there's a murder.
There's a murder.
Yeah.
And we'll pick it up from there. So there's a murder. And I think it would be great, maybe, Spencer, if you went
Sure.
ahead and kind of give us a little summary so that listeners don't have to necessarily pick up this, what we've already described as a compelling read, yet a huge commitment. And I don't know how compelling we've made it for people to pick up, but some people aren't into, reading literature that's been translated. So I think we give them the summary because I really feel that there's a lot of value to the conversation we're going to have because so many of the themes in it pick up to, life as it is today. So I'll give you the honors, sir, since this was your book pick.
So in the newsroom, we call that talking yourself into an assignment. Like you just had such a great idea that you wanted to share it in the meeting. Great, write that piece.
There it is.
So that was. You can tell that I did my share of that by the way that went down. So this is a capacious novel that I just want to start out apologizing to every Turkish speaker. I have no idea how the vast majority of names here are pronounced. I mean, no disrespect at all. I don't know what I'm doing. Please grade me appropriately. And then also, this novel is just capacious. There's so much in it, but to see if we can distill it down quickly, as Mimi and Oscar said, it's a murder mystery to start out with. Superficially, what we're trying to find out through a series of long first-person narration from a variety of point of view characters, some of whom are literal drawings of animals. One of the narrators, which the name refers to, is the essence of the color red. But beyond that, there's murder. It happens because of a religious feud, which we come to learn is also at the same time an artistic feud. Two artistic and religious points of views have clashed in terms of their exponents, and this is happening between miniaturists and calligraphers, practitioners of this great Islamic art, and particularly from the variant of it that comes to the Ottoman Empire in Istanbul when the story takes place, the 16th century, from the east, from Herat in what's now Afghanistan, through Iran, the plains of Anatolia, into the seat of the Sultan. And this takes place because of a clash amongst calligraphers who are putting together a book for the Sultan to commemorate the first millennia of Islam. And there are some in this school of thought that think it's acceptable to start introducing what's referred to as techniques from the Venetian masters or the Frankish masters. And because we're in the 16th century, we understand that this means Renaissance techniques and Renaissance preoccupations about literal representation of the human form. There are religious and cultural legacies that we come to learn bequeath a bounteous artistic heritage and series of styles emanating from that, as you would see as well in medieval Europe and in Renaissance Europe as well, are primarily about expressing artistic beauty through inspiring and invoking religious awe. And we come to see very quickly that the practitioners that we're now to understand represent a murderous coven are those who believe, on the one hand, in the absolute, greatness and eminence of their style of miniaturization and calligraphy, and to render a book beautiful and bring out a subtlety, basically to paint in the margins so as to create a soundtrack. And there are, while nevertheless believing in the eternal nature of this art form because of its relationship to the eternal nature of the religion, they are flexible enough to start allowing the influence. And we're to understand the importance of this is because this book, not only represents the first millennia of Islam, but that it is, to be placed, in the Sultan's possession. He has commissioned this book, but allow for some of the Venetian techniques to be used. And the murder victim is a guy we know. His friends call him Elegant Effendi. So the guy is a born stunter. He's looking good. He's flexing in the miniaturization. And I am going to mess this entirely up. Is he one of the people who's okay? He is not okay with the Venetian techniques.
Correct.
He's not cool with this Venetian shit. He thinks it's un-Islamic. This is messed up. And we start out from his perspective as he describes being murdered and ascending gorgeously to heaven. And then we are introduced to other people who make up the school of thought within this calligrapher, miniaturist, artistic school. The underboss is a guy named Enişte Effendi. Enişte Effendi, Enişte is uncle, apparently. So he's everybody's uncle. Great deal of respect within their community in Istanbul. And several others are calligraphers under him. One guy is called Stork, one guy is called Olive, one guy is called Butterfly, and another person we're introduced to is someone who we only know this character who's a point of view narrator as some will call me a murderer. And this person, the murderer, explains to us that he killed a fanatic. Elegant was an asshole. He was against even the basic understanding of progress, of cosmopolitanism, and people like that are dangerous, don't you think? And then he disappears kind of out of thought. And we are now to understand that one of the characters that we've met here, and as well, I mentioned that Enişte is the underboss, the boss, the head of this school, a truly great calligrapher, the head of the label, is Master Osman. Mm-hmm. Osman, it's impossible not to notice, is also the name of the patriarch, the reason of the Ottoman Empire, the House of Osman. It's the reason why, apparently, I don't know how exactly this occurs linguistically, but Ottoman, basically it just means Osman's empire. So impossible not to notice that from looking at how, CEO of calligraphers, Osman, runs the franchise. And so now we've got this murder mystery, and then we meet, and it's wonderful the ways in which we see Pamuk play, now that we've introduced an element of modernity versus tradition in that binary. Now we know that it's a bloody binary. We get an archetypal character that straddles both, that appears in both Western and Islamic literature, the stranger who has returned to town. And that's a guy who has the badass name Black. He comes back. He's been gone for a very long time, but he's been at war. He's back from the war with the Safavids, basically the reigning empire in Persia at the time that frequently clashed with the Ottoman Empire. And it's important to note that we come to Istanbul for this story in the 16th century. So we are at the absolute zenith of Ottoman power. The Ottoman Empire is an empire on 3 continents. The Sultan in what used to be Constantinople is the ruler of everything from the Danube River to the Nile. It is by far not just the wealthiest empire on earth at the time, but also, as we see from the fact that this is a murder mystery among miniaturists and calligraphers, just simply the seat of global civilization at the time. Simultaneously, as Constantinople turned Istanbul was for centuries under Ottoman rule, both simultaneously cosmopolitan and deeply Islamic. And one of the ways in which we see the cosmopolitanism of Ottoman Istanbul is a character that I was so delighted to have because of what she represents and because of a heritage that has been very deeply lost among my community, which is a Jewish character, a matchmaking yenta, a peddler of both information as well as merchandise, such as clothing, which also makes her a perfect literary device, like a perfect narrative device to propel the plot forward. She's the male. She is the streets. Mm-hmm. She is our kind of Greek chorus in Istanbul. And she's Esther, who is constantly calling attention to both her Jewishness and her matronly physicality. And I love this character so deeply because we'll come back to that because we're still getting through the plot. But this is a very important character to me, and I really want the opportunity just to discuss her. Esther takes messages back and forth from important characters, especially between Black, who's back in town and goes to say hi to all his buddies at calligraphy school, where he dropped out to become a soldier, and so he's getting back with the old gang around the basketball court. But he also remembers that he something he could never forget, which is that Inishta Effendi's daughter, Shakira. Thank you so much.
Well, I listened to the audiobook, so it helps.
Oh my God, that's right. You know how things are pronounced. And you made me do the summary. Okay.
I'm actually thinking, why did I listen to the book? This is even better.
Right. If I can just interject, for anyone who has not read the book,
just
listen to this, then read the book, and then listen to this again. So I think this is a great, so far, it's been very beneficial for me.
Yeah, I feel like I'm getting the Spencer notes.
It gives me another layer. And also, I wish that I had these notes beforehand.
Right, yeah.
So
far, A+ on this synopsis.
It's a lot of pressure, you guys. Okay.
This is the easiest podcast I've ever done. I'm literally watching Spencer do all the work. So Shekara and Black.
Shekara and Black, which is the love story of our book. Although I have a lot of questions about like some of Shek. I have a lot of questions that I would like your perspective on about.
Okay,
Shekara. Shekara, who Black loves very deeply and would do anything for, is a war widow living in her father's house, which we understand is kind of a big deal because by local custom, she is, quote unquote, supposed to be living with her father-in-law, which she flees, I think, kind of with the father-in-law's understanding and consent. If I'm reading this correctly, consent is a weird word to use in this context.
Right. Well, I feel like it's understood that
I don't think, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, it didn't seem like they were really chasing her down in the beginning, knowing that she was living somewhere else. Go ahead, Austin.
Not to give away a plot point, but it's consent, but it's not a consent that the father-in-law is happy about because of something that Shekara's brother-in-law did.
Yes, this is what we're. Yeah, right. So like that's the next thing to bring up, which is basically Shekara has fled the house because her brother-in-law sexually assaulted her and took Hassan. And has like Hassan, who like we get a couple chapters from his perspective, and like he, it's domination that justifies itself as love, and Shekara lives with her father, with her two sons, Shevket and Orhan. We get some adorable kids running around in this book. And she has very mixed feelings when Black returns after all of this time. I take it at this point, like we're just spoiling the book. We're just gonna.
No, I think
what are we doing?
This is a good summary of like introduction of pretty much all the characters, and now we've got the murder mystery going, and these are all the people. These are all the players, right?
Right, and so I think just to just like get us to, I think the point where I think is sort of the natural place where we have everything in place. We've got to say one more thing. And then I think is our springboard for discussing everything. Black is our detective.
Yes.
So like we have if this is a murder mystery, but not without a detective. So it's also a detective story. I understand that this was also kind of a popular style in like contemporary Istanbul. I could be wrong about that. I kind of got that a bit from this lecture series. But if I'm wrong about that, I apologize.
Well, I'm going to take your word for it.
And the murderer soon comes for Shekara's dad. Inishta Effendi buys it. The underboss gets capped, and now we have like a full-on, when the New York Times, who was it? I forget who it was who read that story that everyone was talking about called Bad Art Friend. Okay, all right, cut this. Doesn't matter. I was just thinking like, well, this is the OG Bad Art Friend. Like,
got it.
Anyway.
So we have our plot.
So we have our plot right
and
there.
Then some.
Because like when Shekara's father is killed, obviously she is placed in a terrifying and vulnerable position, not the least of which is because now it remains possible for Hassan to claim her as his lawful wife.
Right.
And this becomes getting Shekara's efforts to extricate herself from this situation really drive the plot forward as much as the murder mystery does. And these two things intersect in a really fantastic way. And I think maybe now we can talk about like what we liked and stuff.
Yeah. Wow. That was more of a summary than I would have expected. And again, I wish you had just summarized the book for me as much as I enjoyed. I did enjoy overall, like kind of having the completion of it, but A plus, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think, again, even though this is a great summary, it won't take away from your appreciation of how the novel was written, because even knowing this great setup of where we're at now, if you haven't read the book, you can still go and read the book and still appreciate the way it was written, and also still be wondering, well, who is the murderer up to this point still.
Yeah. And so I'm just going to be all over the place and jumping around because of mostly time, but also like, yeah, this is a really long book. And there are some things that I had questions about and also thought it would be kind of fun to sort of discuss. And, one thing that really jumped out to me was this whole, the blindness is a great virtue of Allah's grace. And I thought that whole segment where I guess essentially the old masters of the miniaturist would be embarrassed if they grew old but not blind, because perceiving the world through blindness was great. And that whole description of what is it? You have to be able to see it like an 8-year-old child should be able to like envision the painting and have that much clarity. And so much to the fact that they would actually blind themselves if they didn't go blind because it was so embarrassing. I thought that was insane. So I don't know if you know anything about that part of it, or what your thoughts were.
Well, I'll just be coming back to this point again and again and again. I don't know shit. Like, I don't like the last thing I want to do is get on a podcast and start talking like with certainty about a religion I don't practice, about cultures whose languages I don't speak, places I've never been. Like I'm appreciating this with the understanding that like if I'm exerting myself, I'm probably getting 20% of My Name is Red. I am sure that given how many literary, artistic, and religious allusions Pamuk makes use of, there's a kind of fable, possibly folk tale, possible fairy tale of a love story between characters named Shirin and Husrev, whose pronunciations I'm sure I am butchering, that I am sure like everyone will understand who's familiar with the folk tales, like how they map onto these characters. But like I was too lazy to even Wikipedia it. So I have no idea.
It's a lot. No, there's a lot. But I just found that whole dynamic, story within a story for me, like kind of fascinating.
Just to speak on that, I mean, I found that the most like the parts of the book where I kind of understood that I was in the presence of the sublime and like, was going to grasp to understand that. And when in the presence of the sublime, you are not in, you are in something that you can understand through the eyes of an 8-year-old, but also like capacious. And I love the thing that I kept taking away from the descriptions of the religious ecstasy of miniaturization is that, and this is what I also understood, something also I don't know shit about is art history. So, bear with me. Like, this is the most Philistinic guest you could have gotten for this. I truly don't know what I'm talking about. But
well, that's okay. We're just here to, share our opinions.
As best as
all my listeners know, I never know what I'm talking about, so it's fine.
As best as I understand this, the religious implications of the clash between the Renaissance techniques and the Herat-derived miniaturist techniques is about the holiness of representation. And there are lots of very kind of gross Orientalist ways in which Westerners talk about Islam to consider that, like, they think the representation of the human form is barbaric. Like, that proves how barbaric they are. And like, what I understand them to be expressing is that it is whack to try and see the world through the eyes of people. That, like, where beauty comes from is by trying to represent something as God would see it. And like, yeah, like, that makes formal representation sound fucking whack, doesn't it? And like, that's why I just found myself, like, moments again and again throughout this book, just thinking, like, it, while operating as like this both wonderful analysis of like how deeply these cultural heritages matter at the approach of modernity, you also have this element of tragedy because of the perspective that we read it from, where we know that, like, to put it, like, I think in a way that Pamuk would kind of mean it but not mean it, like, be like playing with it ironically, but also trying to make the essential point, which is that the barbarians win. And like, this ultimately is, in a way that I think, like, makes the cosmopolitanism of it kind of put on trial a little. In a constructive way, in a way that kind of breaks through like a lot of Western pieties. But Pamuk seems to be saying that, like, what the murderer and what Anishta Effendi kind of don't really get is that they are, kind of playing with fire here. That the introduction, like, of basically, like, what is also so wonderful about it is they keep on basically, like, both sides of the argument can like agree on one major point, which is like, this Renaissance shit is dope. Like, this is dope in a way that all of this other shit that, like, the Christians, like the infidels, keep on sending to us, like, that's kind of laughable. This is dope. And they're wary about, like, what that might mean. And you have assertions from characters that were meant to sympathize with, in particular Master Osman, who, like, reaches this plane of the sublime and walks us through it in a way that, like, not a lot of novels even bother attempting. Like, this was fucking on another level, but takes us through his confidence and his ecstasy in his faith, in the eternal nature of Islam, of the eternal nature of its truths. And so accordingly, he has nothing to fear from the onslaught to come from the West. And he approaches that not with any kind of political inclination, not to make a point that Pamuk wants to make, in other words, but because his faith and his art are that strong. And that's just gorgeous. Like, if the novel did nothing else, and it does like 6 other amazing things, but like, if the novel did nothing else, it's a classic for that.
Yeah. And so one of the things that you mentioned just made me think of, where you can't deny something is dope, is a recurring theme that I've had conversations with Mimi for 20 plus years, which is like, yes, East Coast hip hop music is the best.
Yeah, exactly.
But I cannot deny that the Chronic was a game-changing, like Ain't Nothing But a G Thing can come on and I can be East Coast hip hop till I die, but I was like, but that is amazing. And even though I don't want to admit it, but it is amazing. It's like, that's just an analogy that came to mind when you said you can't deny that this is dope.
For me, it's Cube. It's taken me for
a good day.
Today was a good day. Today was a good day.
but when Heems rapped, "I'm so New York, I still don't bump Tupac," I felt that.
Right.
Exactly. And the trouble is recognizing, like, when you actually do listen to Tupac, like, this guy's fucking incredible.
Exactly. I don't.
We have this is the thing we have it all the time, because I'm also East Coast till I die, but I have an appreciation for Tupac, and he's like, that's because you're a woman and you like think he's hot or whatever. And I'm like, no, there's actual talent there too. You know, it's just, you want to, in your blood, you have to hate him because you're from Brooklyn. But you know, I mean.
Yeah,
also,
that's just small tangent there. But.
Yeah, totally. But like, when I started thinking about like the miniaturists in those terms, like that, like just made me enjoy the novel so much more. However, like, you know, however much it says about me, you know, I had fun kind of overlaying that template on it, which like led to something else about this novel, like. My Name is Red is a really fun book to read if, like me, your brain has been broken by the internet. Like you'll have, like we mentioned earlier, some of the chapters are narrated by like aspects of the calligraphy. So there are a couple chapters because it is a plot in the murder mystery. A couple chapters are narrated by a horse that's drawn funny. And like the whole time I'm just like thinking of like if BoJack Horseman were like on a reality show and he'd be like giving a confessional. And so it's like the horse for me is voiced by Will Arnett, like talking in this kind of like, well, I don't know if this guy has ever seen a horse before. The way he's rendered me makes no sense. Like my hind legs can't stand up if I'm supposedly rearing back and kicking at someone. So like the horse is also like offering like bitchy art criticism of our murderer. So like this is also just like a hysterically funny novel. Like there are moments there's a lot of comedies of errors that happen here. When we get into the times when we're arguing about art and religion, and like East Coast, West Coast, like it really gets very funny, while at the same time also underscoring that like the stakes are really very real. Like, I guess we start out like, you know, we start out with Biggie's murder, right?
Like beautifully tied in there. Right?
Yeah. And so you also, while reading this, texted me your analogy between comic creators sitting around discussing the whole, like, how they do the art and their justification for why it should look a certain way. And I'd love for you to share that, being that you are a comic aficionado as well. And I have one right next to me too.
Okay. I say this not to take any shots at the god Rob Liefeld. I say it for the opposite purpose.
I'll take shots at him if you want.
But like, first off, there is an element of like being at the comic store arguing with people because like you overhear them like either really knowing what the fuck they're talking about or not knowing at all what the fuck they're talking about and like getting into that. And when the horse starts talking, I just think I was like thinking to myself about like the rap on Rob Liefeld is like Rob can't draw feet.
Right.
And I'm just like, Rob is trying to draw feet the way God sees feet.
That line needs to be sent to someone that we know.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, so I had to read that out loud to Oscar because there have been conversations on that. And the only reason I even know is because I've heard him discuss that. So that's why it was so hilarious when you texted me that.
Yeah, so we grew up we're around the same age. So, you know, when I was 14 years old or, you know, whatever, and saw Rob Liefeld's art, I thought it was awesome. And I remember talking to a friend of mine who's about 10 years older and huge comic book guy and also owns his own store.
Paper Asylum, shout out.
Shout out to Paper Asylum, and has recommended over the years some great things to read. So he says, you know what? He just couldn't believe that I had said that. And I said, but you know, I was 14 years old and I look back and I do see that everyone he draws is in a certain way. And he sent me, I guess there's a famous, you know, online article of why Rob Liefeld's not great, you know, or that really disparages him. And when I read that, I was like, oh, okay, that's rough, but I see where you're coming from. And so looking back, I don't see Rob Liefeld's art with the same fondness, but I still remember how I felt at that age seeing it and thinking it was dope. So it's sort of like a song you liked when you were younger and you go back and go,
or a movie
and you're like, oh, this doesn't hold up as much as I thought, but I still have my feelings towards it because it you know, the nostalgia is still there.
I would just say to that, first off, I'm about to like publish a comic book. And so I'd really, really, really like to not start out by like indulging any kind of disrespect put onto Rob Liefeld. I mean none. I will tell, you know, I have been on my own Rob journey. I have come out of it entirely in favor of his art. And I'll just say why. That feeling that he invoked in you, I don't think it's just because of like a thing that you liked at 14 or however old any of us are. I think it's because we recognize by the part of ourselves that remain able to be awed by things, that he captured an energy and channeled it and made everything about the stories that he was telling exciting, even when, and I would argue, especially when they made you say, like, did that make sense? And like that to me is what great art does.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you question. It makes you ask those questions.
It prompts them. It prompts questions about like, how literally are we supposed to understand this? How impressionistically are we supposed to understand this? And like the answer, like, you know, comes back to like, what works for you about this? And like, there isn't, and like, you can just inspect that endlessly. Like it just contains, you know, more and more layers. And I just like, don't really, I think it's cheap and easy to do what that, I know, of course, the, you know, listicle you're talking about. Like so, I wouldn't, as someone who has been written about on the internet, as well as someone who writes about other people, you know, for a living, I just think that's bullshit. I think it is entirely lazy and easy to put out in front of people a Philistine's critique of them, like something that like, yeah, like you understand where the thing is coming from, but like the point is to deny it. The point of that article is not just to laugh at Rob Liefeld. It's to try and kill the part of you that's moved by Rob Liefeld, that appreciates, that experiences that joy authentically. And like, that's bullshit. I think that's like, if journalism had an anti-life equation, it's that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this actually ties in really well, ironically, that it's because this whole book, like one of the themes is that whole I feel like the book never makes you choose a side, right? The modernist versus the traditionalist. It doesn't push one agenda necessarily. It's making you think, like, should paintings be perfect as we see it in everyday life? Or I guess their idea of should the image transform feelings and beliefs and be expressed differently? And that's the point, like you said, is art. Like they always say, it's subjective. It's whoever's looking at the art and what you get from it. I did want to ask you, as an artist yourself and a writer, an author, and doing all these things, that one of the big things I thought was interesting how they in the book talked about signing your name is a big no-no, and should which poses the questions of should artists receive fame or glory or recognition, or is it just for the sake of art? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
My honest answer is I didn't zero in on that in the book at all. so
Interesting.
I am not, yeah, take from that what you like, but I am not. Tell me why you like that. Tell me what you got from it.
I liked it. I just found that interesting. What you found, I found it interesting that I think it was probably Master Osman that
Black, I think they were,
and Black, and they were having a conversation, and how horrible it is to sign your painting, or how it was frowned upon, right? And I thought, oh well, that's interesting because I don't know how to draw anything. Stick figures maybe is pushing it. I mean, even that I think could be unrecognizable. So I find it so incredible, anything that's artistic and the amount of work. And I've been to so many galleries and everything, and I'm thinking, I always go, oh, who is that by? Or you kind of learn to ask, who is it by, right? That's like a normal question. And so I just found it so interesting that it was such a frowned upon thing in this book.
Well, now that you mention it, Mimi, one of the things I enjoyed about all of the first person narration amongst the miniaturists is like how like gleefully petty like this community is, how parochial it is. Like that's one of the things that like makes it feel real. It's also one of the things that makes like it feel real that like this murder happens at all, that like someone gets really mad because like you wouldn't like turn that fucking music off like in my car, and like now like I was trying to drive you home, dude, and like you brought this upon yourself. And so while they do, I now, yes, they have that colloquy, and like I think it correct me, but like Master Osman is the one who's like, you don't sign your name on this.
Yes.
At the same time, what like they're also saying is like signing your name like is vulgar, because like anyone who appreciates this art, like the style already. Like I don't need to tell you like you already know, right? Like you're supposed to be able to be so fluent in these styles that there shouldn't be a credits page. I got that more as like Pamuk kind of poking fun at the piety of saying like, it is for the glory of God that I do this thing. When in fact, like they're also just like, all I need to say is rappers, I monkey flip them with the funky rhythm. I be kicking position, inflicting composition of pain. And like, because you just immediately like, who the fuck said that? And like said it like that. And like, particularly after like, you know what that is? You know what that is? You know how, okay. So not, he's not Master Osman, he's Master Nosman.
Right.
Because like Master Osman, who's like the foremost practitioner of class. So basically like Master Osman is the GOAT. Because like, remember, like Nas launches into that right after ad-libbing, I don't know how to start this.
Right.
And then starts it with simply the greatest way any MC has ever started like any verse ever. Like the most original, the most jazz-like, the most like as he says, inflicting composition. Like if you're reading this and you're like us, just when you think Master Osman, just think NAS.
That is that's a very interesting way of looking at it. This is why Mimi and I were so excited to talk to you, because of how you make those connections. And we're very similar. From all the things that we were saying, there's something that came to mind, even with Mimi's point to not signing your name or not. And there's a theme somewhere in the book. And again, this is total guesswork, right? A theme that is,
right.
Even religion can be practiced in a way where you're like, you take what you want from it. On all, like the ones who are very strict on seeing miniaturist or religion in a certain way, they're kind of making their own rules about it. And then the ones who, and I think even in one of the chapters of the book where it's Satan speaking through the storyteller, where he's like, yeah, I mean, really, God doesn't really care if you're like passing wind or jacking off. There's a really cool line there where he uses, and I don't know, all this is making me think that this discussion, what you beautifully said about Rob Liefeld, it like the beauty in it is that you can kind of take not everything that you want from it, but you're sort of making the rules on your own for everything. Does that make sense? Like,
it does.
Yeah.
And I think like it is one of the great, like both pleasures and contributions of the novel that it can move so effortlessly from showing like the pettiness of contending schools of thought, especially when contending about something as profound as religion, about different schools of thoughts, ability to channel religion, channel religious awe, as we've been saying, but like work its way down, from the pettiness to the divine, and like back out again. Like the comedy of the book is amazing, the tragedy of the book is amazing, the romance of the book is amazing. Just everything. It's just astonishing. The way, and also the history of the book is amazing. The cultural critique offered by virtue of us knowing like how we get from the supremacy, the dominant. I shouldn't say the supremacy, the dominance, the glory of 16th century Istanbul to our hellscape. Is really something else as well.
Yeah. And so we're coming up on some time stuff here, but I can't not mention what I consider to be my favorite chapter of the book.
Please.
I know there's other people here that care more, but that probably have more to contribute. But the gold coin is like my favorite chapter, and it came at a much needed moment too. Cause like I said, there were parts in this book where I was like, okay, I'm gonna push through because I don't get what's going on and I'm not smart enough to be reading this, but I just love that. And it just, as you and I are big Rucka fans, and that whole greed comes into mind, and all his books always have like themes of that, and we talk about it all the time. But like it just like that, showing the representative how artists are paid, but that point of view of the gold coin was just the comic relief I needed at that moment. And there was just so much that was going on. And I know I texted you about it after I read it, and I was like, did you read the gold coin yet?
Well, that to me was also very much a NAS moment. That was, I gave you power, right? Like, it's. Why don't you tell people what both the gold coin means in that moment, and like why it connected so hard with you?
And I agree also that it's probably the funniest chapter in the book.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, we just, Oscar and I discussed it, and no, it was just, I think, like I said, it came at a much needed moment because it was such comic relief. And so basically it's from the gold coin point of view. And as you mentioned, sometimes we would get a tree kind of talking from a tree point of view, or a dog talking from a dog point of view, which is really just the storyteller. And so throughout the book, there are certain moments where the storyteller appears and shares from that point of view. And it's usually in an object or an animal or something, right? And so really it was just really funny to hear how the artists are paid, and this coin is saying how it's been passed from person to person, and the places that it has been, and the places that it was every orifice of the body, and how it was just. But for some reason, the way that chapter was written, like, just took me out of some of maybe the translation issues I was having, right? Like some of those times where it just really felt like, okay, it gave me the Russian literature flashbacks, right? And so for me, I just found that so refreshing, but also it just made it seem like it was like a dirty chapter, like it just showed like the griminess of that. It wasn't just the beautiful art and the miniaturists and how, it was all about the art and for Allah and everything, right? Like this was like, no, we're on this, money is involved. And when money comes into play, there's, ulterior motive. And I don't know. It really spoke to me. And Oscar and I talked about it. And he when he read the chapter, he also had thoughts.
Well, the biggest thing for me, and without looking at it in too much, I don't always look at things like this with depth, unfortunately. Like Spencer does. Right, exactly.
Come on.
But from this conversation, one, it was just the funniest written chapter in my opinion. There's a lot of funny parts, but that one is the one that stands out as probably the chapter that was the funniest. And then in another way, you're getting all of the different narrators and all the different characters. When it's an actual character in the book, each chapter is showing it from their perspective what's happening. When it's something like the tree or the dog or the horse, you're getting it as told through a storyteller through the eyes of the dog or the horse. But the difference with the coin is that it was simultaneously like a bird's eye view and a street level view, because the coin has gone everywhere. There was no place that it wasn't at. It was near the Sultan, and it was in the church, and it was with the beggars, and it was in someone's anus. It was just, that doesn't give anything away. It was freaking everywhere.
Doesn't give anything away.
You know what? I did that to entice people to read the chapter. And
that was not pleasant, according to the coin.
Now you're giving it away. See, but that's just a thought that came to mind while reading the chapter, is that everything else had like a street level view, 360 around that, but the coin was everywhere. It was just everywhere. So that's all.
No one needs to read the book anyway. Spencer was brilliant. Like it was the best synopsis ever.
Well, one thing that I would like very much to hear your thoughts on, Mimi, is Shakira and the love story, as well as the survivor story that surrounds it.
Yeah. Oh my God. So I will say that I was hoping you were way ahead of me in the book, and I was going to ask you to censor it, because I often have Oscar do that, because I do have like some issues when it comes to sexual assault and reading things. But luckily, this book kind of it didn't get into too much detail. And so it was fine. But like, so Shakira and the love story part was actually the part, of course, that I kind of gravitated towards, because it was a much needed break from just the kind of the heavier themes. But so I enjoyed the love story part, but there was a lot of frustration with her, and sometimes, especially when it came to Hassan, like I had some confusion there. And
so did I.
Yeah. Yeah. It was very confusing, because at one point, I think even in the book, as her, and it does make sense in terms of, I know a lot of survivors have that, like, some sort of confused love for their assaulter. And so there was parts where I think she thought she even loved him, and that really confused me. But so one is, I did love the love story between her and Black, in terms of like the courtship, but then it got kind of like weird, right? Like when they were in the house, in the garden, where he was like trying to like push her too far to do things that she said only, what was the word? Only
think like
prostitutes would do, and I would never do such things, and and
it was like also in that moment you read that there are chapters both from Shekura and from Black's perspective, but you're just like, my man, you're just back from the war, your teenage girlfriend is here for you, and like she's meeting you surreptitiously, and like you've been fooling around a little, like you like this is you have this, like you don't fuck this up, like,
right? He's like pushing his luck, right? Like this is his childhood love. I'm like, okay, like if he needed to go get relief, like I'm sure there were some professionals that could have taken care of him, and should have been something he would have like had more care with. I think he got carried away, but I mean, from a woman's perspective and also a survivor's perspective, like it was a little rough to have to kind of listen or kind of see her battle with her assaulter and like gravitate towards him. And like when she went to his house to stay with him with the kids, like that really frustrated me, and like almost didn't want to go back with Black kind of thing. Like that was confusing for me. It was very, very confusing for me. So I had a lot of mixed emotions around that, and obviously around like their Black and her sexual tension as well. That was like really, at least it was done sort of comedically because of like the dialogue was well translated, I guess I could say, well written, obviously, but sometimes in translation that could have been a disaster pants. But yeah, so I mean, but I did like, I guess that it ended up okay. Like it ended up happy. Like they also ended up connecting on a emotional, but also sexual level. Like they, at the end of it, like there was like,
no spoilers.
No spoilers. Well, at this point, there was release. Oscar saying there was release. But from a survivor perspective, it was very confusing because of her feelings towards Hassan and how that dynamic played out. Like that was very confusing for me.
I just want to note that confusion, and probably accordingly should not. Like that's probably a good place to pivot the conversation.
Yeah, no.
I think not to put words in your mouth or thoughts in your head. It was probably more palatable to read because there's this history of women being assaulted throughout all of history, that it's almost like these are things that happen as one, but then two, it could be positive or negative. I don't know in your perspective, maybe, but they left some of that to your imagination of what happened. Like they started to go into detail, but it wasn't a graphic assault, and it made you just think. Well, every woman in this society was basically, this could happen to them at any time.
Certainly.
And it was just something like, well, I guess this is just something that could happen at any time. I don't know if that makes it easier or not. Maybe that's not the right word, but it's just something that this is just part of that history, I guess.
I did like how pretty much everyone in the book was in love with Shekura.
Yeah, like
she is like the love of everyone's like.
The scene from Beauty and the Beast when everyone's singing Bonjour.
Yeah. Yes, right? Bonjour, like, exactly. Every time like she walks. Right. Every time, like she's walking around through Istanbul, like, Yep. Everyone's just like drooling over her, basically. Yeah. Now, before we have to wrap up. I think that, like, I know you wanted to talk about Esther. So.
Oh yes. Yes. So, how to do this? Esther connects. The character of Esther in My Name is Red connects to a history of the Jewish experience in exile that I don't really want to open up your podcast for this kind of controversy. So I will just say this to myself. I will just say this for myself. It is a history that, because of tendencies that emanate from Zionism, we as Jews do not get taught. And that is to our great detriment. I am referring to the Jewish experience of living under Islamic as opposed to Christian rule. To be really blunt about it, if you wanted to live as freely in exile as you could, you would rather live in Cordoba than anywhere in Christian Europe. You would much rather live in Ottoman Istanbul and Ottoman Salonika. This isn't really much this just isn't a matter of historical dispute. You just have to think about it, frankly, for 5 minutes. The proof of it is basically this. When the kingdoms of Aragon and Castile reconquer, as they call it, the Iberian Peninsula from the Islamic influence of the former Emirate and then Caliphate of Cordoba, and then the last kingdom of Granada. Among the things they're really keen on doing is expelling all of their Jewish and all of their Muslim subjects. Where did we go? We went to Salonika and we went to Constantinople. The Sultan at the time, who I think probably no longer Mehmet the Conqueror, so I guess Selim the Grim. I apologize. I don't know I forget who comes after Mehmet.
I'm not familiar, but this is fascinating. Keep going.
The quote, as I understand it, was he publicly mocks Ferdinand and Isabella by saying the king and queen of Spain, clearly are, so wise and prosperous. Why else would they send me such excellent subjects? And in the character of Esther, who every Jewish person who reads this character's name immediately understands what the callback is. The reference is to Queen Esther, one of the heroes of the Jewish people. Queen Esther is the husband of the king in Persia, and she saves us from his evil anti-Semitic advisor Haman. We have to basically say "fuck you" to him when we say his name out loud. It's a lot of fun in Temple. We have our whole, Jewish Halloween Purim is devoted to telling this story. So this is why, anyway, Esther is kind of the lifeblood. She's the streets of Istanbul. She reconnects us to Jewish Istanbul. She reconnects us to our place in what, after 9/11, is frequently described by the most ignorant and loudest people as the supposed hellscape known as dimitude. If you've heard that word, it's because you have been, like me, hopelessly online in the 9/11 era and in what likes to style itself as the counter-jihadist internet space. They use that term a lot without understanding the first fucking thing about it and without understanding the first fucking thing about what the Jewish experience of Christian Europe was like. As a term to sort of say what a marauding Islam has in store for all non-believers. I would end it there just by saying that Esther is such a wonderful and vibrant character who navigates what is not an easy experience. She's frequently mocked. Her Jewishness is thrust upon her in both friendly street corner ways, with people who ultimately mean no harm, that we're all kind of familiar with, but also in ways that like people really do mean you harm, that you can also be familiar with. It's no accident, and this is, I think, one of the many glories of Orhan Pamuk as a novelist, that while he is utilizing this character, one of the scenes, in fact, is a place that Esther has to navigate frequently getting to, but like one of the main scenes of action in this story is a place called the House of the Hanged Jew.
Right.
So like Pamuk is not saying that there is no anti-Semitic violence going on. He is highlighting the richness, the complexity of this cosmopolitan environment in which there is a place, a tenuous place, perhaps, as you know, for its Jewish subjects, but like that is not exceptional. That is familiar, not only of the Jewish experience in Christian Europe, but every minority experience, right? In ways subtle and murderous, right? So I found Pamuk's, characteristic deftness, insight, and refusal to settle for like easy, lazy, cant-infested descriptions of history, so resonant, so meaningful, as someone who's like just scratching the surface of familiarity with that history.
So thank you for sharing that, because that adds a lot of context. And knowing that you were reading this book when Esther is introduced with some of those, quote unquote, stereotypes, Jewish stereotypes, my first thought was like, oh, interesting that he's introducing this character who is very colorful, very vibrant. But what you said about where would a person of Jewish descent want to be in exile, it reminded me of when Mimi and I went to Spain and went to, was it Seville, where they Sevilla, where they filmed those Game of Thrones scenes.
Was that the Alhambra? Did you get to see the Alhambra? Oh,
which is,
I need to see that before I die.
It is unreal, but this goes to show you why it's important to know your history, because we had a tour guide who was telling us that the Spanish royalty made a huge mistake by expelling the Jewish people from their country, and almost started directly correlating that to the fall of the Spanish Empire. And so your point of of one of the sultans saying, "Oh, thank you for giving me these excellent subjects," it just brought that to mind.
Because like the Jewish quarters.
It was the Jewish. She was walking us around the Jewish quarters by Alhambra, and it was. What you brought is a lot of context to me reading this book, the character of Esther, not knowing how to take it, because I don't have your background, right, and your history, and now realizing that this author told it in that way, it gives me a lot more to think about as I think about that character. A lot more depth about it. So yeah.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm very grateful to bring this full circle. In a podcast where I really feared having to extemporize about My Name Is Red, that I could have done that.
This podcast is super relaxed, and every time we do any kind of book reading, it's really just more like our celebration of it, right? And so by no means do anybody here pretend to be experts, like you said at the beginning and everything, but I think it's more like a celebration and appreciation, and just kind of our thoughts and what kind of conversation sparks from that. And that's what good art, good writing, etc. does, right? Is sparks conversation and draws correlations to things that are happening now or things that happened before. And so I appreciate that you brought a book to my attention, and then I decided to read it, and now we're having this awesome conversation. So no, I definitely appreciate that. And maybe we could pick a shorter book next time. No, I'm just kidding.
It's your Sure. So you got to pick the book this time.
You have to do the summary.
And I'll do the summary. Okay. Whoever picks the summary.
Well done,
fair.
Oscar.
That is fair. That is fair. And so we'll definitely do another book in the future. But I would also like to keep talking about comics and music and things like that. And I like when Oscar comes in and can,
totally.
You guys can do a rap battle, or something.
We certainly can.
But only like quoted raps. So you don't have to come up with your own. You could just like quote, different artists like East Coast, Brooklyn stuff. So, but this is a lot of fun. And I'm sure we've scratched the surface. Like you said, you only had 20% of the book. We've really scratched the surface on the themes and whatnot. But I think that we covered quite a bit.
I'm grateful for it. Thank you for letting me talk through a book I'm reading instead of just like subjecting my friends who don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. Like why are you texting me screenshots from this book and like saying things about NAS?
We're the perfect audience for that, to be honest. So like that Nosman thing, like our minds are going to be blown for the rest of the night. You have no idea.
I might have to reread the book now, and it's a lot to read. But this has been really good for me. I don't know if people listening to it will get any value from what I'm saying, but I appreciated just having that conversation because there's tons of books that we've all read that we've never had conversations about, right? And this just will, I don't know, it'll be a good memory of the book. So that's all I gotta say.
I love it. And
thank you, you guys.
It's just great to have friends. It's a book club, right? But so Spencer, hopefully you'll come back and talk to us again. And This was a lot of fun. So thanks for being a guest on the show.
Thank you so much, Mimi. Good night, you guys. Thank you, Oscar.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.